This is Pace Per Mile. For more on the latest news, reviews, check out pacepermile.com. Like us on Facebook and join in the conversation on Twitter. With host Chris Nicholas, this is Pace Per Mile.
Welcome back to Pace Per Mile. I'm Chris Nicholas. A special show this week. Last Monday, Tuesday, and a little bit of Wednesday, the three individuals that are joining us this week experienced a race, we'll say it like no other, Bad Water. And if you know a little bit about Bad Water, you know it's hot. And I don't think there's a lot of water there. But Charlie Engle, welcome to Pace Per Mile. David Clark as well. David ran in the race. And Meredith Dolhare. Meredith, this was your first race, and we'll talk about training and how you experienced it from your perspective. Charlie, I think this was your sixth completion of 7. And David, I don't know where you are over the board, but I think you've probably put enough races under your belt that this was just another day. Although you guys finished in a very nice position, and even a record broken by Charlie Engle on the show today. Charlie, how are you today?
I'm doing great, man. Thanks for having me on.
Glad to have you here. Meredith, you and Charlie have a connection together. Charlie helped you train for Bad Water. How are you doing today?
He did. Thanks for having me on. He helped me a ton. It was amazing. I didn't feel like a rookie out there, thanks to Charlie.
That's great. And for our listeners, David Clark, David's all over Facebook. David, what number race Bad Water was this for you?
Oh, this was my first.
2 newbies on this show, and all 3 of you interacted with each other during Bad Water in some way, either connecting with each other for a few miles or pre-race or post-race. And for our listeners, we're going to talk a little bit about Bad Water, of course, heat training, because it's summer and we just got over a pretty hot week here in the U.S. and around the world. And then we'll talk about what's up next for these 3 individuals, because we always want to have another race on our race calendar. If you don't know Charlie Engle, you probably have maybe watched the movie Running the Sahara, very much well known for that experience of running across the Sahara. Charlie, was about 5,000 miles, right?
It was darn close, yes.
With our good friend Ray Zahab. Tell us a little bit about your life. I mean, people know about you, but from your perspective, what's your career highlights?
Yeah, I would say, running the Sahara certainly is the thing that I seem to be most known for, but obviously there was a lot of years of running before then, about 10 years of ultra running before that time, and a lot of stage races. A lot of those 7-day stage races that I did led me to want to put together my own sort of self-styled expedition, and that's what Running the Sahara was. Running America came next, which was certainly less successful from a standpoint of setting any records or even completing that journey, but another film was made, Running America, that is a little different look at how things can happen on an expedition. But throughout those years, I did my first Bad Water in 2003, and so this 10-year stretch where I had 7 starts and 6 finishes, Bad Water has been kind of really a standard for me, if you will. My last race was in 2009 at Bad Water, and after that I had a short federal vacation, as I would call it, that took a couple of years of my life. And this race for me was really what I would call a bookend race. This sort of ends that chapter of my life, and I'm glad to say that this was a really successful Bad Water for me. And having Meredith and David out there was just another highlight of the race experience.
You broke the record in 50 to 59-year-old. 3 hours ahead of the record, is that correct?
I did. I had a really good race. I was 26 hours, 15 minutes, and I think the old record was 29 and a half, and it was surreal in a way. It just was, I never used the word easy in association with Bad Water, but I prepared well, and I stuck to my plan out there and came in 5th overall, 2nd American. Even that time, it shows you how things have changed. My time of 26:15, I would have won the race probably 14 or 15 times in the past with that kind of time. Yet, this year it placed me 5th, and I'm very happy with that. It shows just how far the race has come also.
And Meredith is on the show this week as well, and the connection that you two have is that you trained her mentally, physically for her first Badwater. And Meredith, when you started thinking about it or reading about Badwater and said, I'm going to run from Death Valley to Mount Whitney, were you ready to make that commitment? And a lot of it came from some struggles in your life, too. Tell our listeners about your career highlights and what brought you to Badwater.
It actually even goes further than that, further back than that. I met Charlie, a number of years ago. It was before I even did my first Ironman. I was training for my first Ironman, and we met at a charity event years ago for a charity in Africa because Charlie had just gotten back from the Sahara. And, I thought it was a really big deal training for my first Ironman. And I heard about the Sahara and I was like, you mean there are things bigger than Ironman? And so that was, I was starting to wrap my head around even the expedition he did in the Sahara. But I knew about Badwater and he started talking to me about Badwater. And right then and there, I knew that I wanted to start compiling races to eventually receive that coveted invitation, not only qualify, but you got to still get the invitation. I did a bunch of Ironman races. I guess I'm most known for adding a lot of them on top of each other. I did Ironman France, Austria, and Switzerland back to back to back, 3 weekends in a row consecutively. And then 4 weeks after that, Ultraman UK, which is 2.5 times Ironman. So all within the same summer. And right before doing the ones in the Alps, I qualified for Kona. So after Ultraman, I went to Kona. But the struggles you're talking about, while I was doing all that, I didn't realize I had ruptured 2 discs in my cervical spine. Following Kona, I had been having all sorts of issues with my wrists, and thinking that I was just having wrist issues, I didn't realize that it was because I had ruptured C4 to 6 in my cervical spine, and that controls wrist function. So I ended up having to have, a major repair, a total reconstruction in my spine, and a plate and 6 screws put in there, and that was in 2012. So I was out all of 2012 getting that repaired. And, I kind of came back with a vengeance. Desire is a powerful motivator. I went ahead while I was still in my neck brace and applied for the Brazil 135 and did that 7 months post-spinal surgery because I still had Badwater on the radar. I had done a couple of other 100-mile races, so I would still be able to qualify for Badwater with those, but I had to finish Brazil. And throughout all this, Charlie was in Brazil, and then once I did get into Badwater, he has been with me every single step of the way, helping me train. He's done my last 4 races with me. I mean, he has just been invaluable. He's helped me every step of the way, shared secrets that he has. I had these, he's really been invaluable. Like I said, I did not feel like a rookie out there. Mentally, I think that's probably my strong suit, is that I can wrap my head around the distance and going from below sea level to the top of Mount Whitney. I like that challenge. If it's hard and seems silly, then sign me up. If it's not hard, then I'm not probably very interested in doing it.
It sounds like the races that you've put on your schedule over the years and have signed up for and completed, that Badwater doesn't seem so big of a challenge, or was it?
Oh, gosh, yes. I think part of the reason that I had a good race and was third among the women and top 20 is because I had such a respect for the race. I mean, I respect that race more than probably anything. I knew it was going to be hard, and I started preparing mentally months in advance, probably years in advance. I knew if I ever did get to this race that it was going to be the hardest thing that I had ever done. And I have a huge respect for the distance and the heat and the race and the climbs. And, Charlie told me I was going to feel like crap. And he was right. I hit points where I felt awful. I mean, absolutely awful. And he always has told me, when I first started doing ultra, after I crossed over from Ironman to ultra distance of any kind, when you're feeling good, it's going to change. When you're feeling bad, it's going to change. Just keep moving. Don't waste time. And I always can hear him in my head saying that. But respecting the distance and respecting the races is a huge part of success of any kind in ultra.
And that's the way you should look at each and every race, whether it be a 5K, a 10K, an ultra, bicycling, etc. Charlie, obviously that feels great knowing that you helped train Meredith for Bad Water. And David, being a trainer himself, David's first race, you probably also, David, got some feedback from other runners, other ultra marathoners out there, your own experiences. Tell our listeners about your career.
Like most things in ultra, my career and my intro to running has been a long and varied journey. And, it really all started for me with just trying to, prevent the spiral that I was in. And I was in my early 30s, and I was quickly approaching death. I had ballooned up to about 320 pounds, and I had every possible condition you could imagine. High blood pressure, diabetes, high cholesterol. I had 2 herniated discs in my back, and I knew that I needed to do something, but just promising myself that I was going to make a change didn't seem to work. So I finally, kind of got to that point where, Charlie knows what I'm talking about, where just the mental struggles of trying to handle that situation became too much to bear. So I just kind of surrendered it all and figured that I didn't have it all figured out, and that what I thought I knew about life was just a bunch of crap. And so from that point, I figured, I'm going to be a sober person. And what does a sober person do? And the answer came back was like, well, anything you want. So I decided to take up this running thing because it seemed horrible to me. And, I was kind of used to torturing myself. So my running started out as, 15 seconds of jogging and, then a minute of trying not to vomit, and 15 more seconds of jogging, and signed up for a 5K. It was a turkey trot, actually. And that was a horribly frightening experience. I assumed that everyone at the 5K was going to be 145 pounds and running like all the pictures I saw, like Prefontaine. I figured I was going to be the only overweight person for sure, but that wasn't true. And, I finished it in like 39 minutes, and it's still one of my most proudest moments. Kind of came back and ran it in 22 minutes or so a year later, and I just kind of moved up the spectrum from there. I went to half marathon and marathon, and I did a half Ironman, and somewhere along that process, I was about 6 months in, and I saw this movie called Running on the Sun, and I just it touched something in the back of my head, that kind of like what Meredith was talking about, where if it doesn't seem impossible, it kind of doesn't seem worth doing. That kind of triggered something in me, and I kind of put Bad Water in the back burner and decided to explore the ultra thing. And I signed up for a 24-hour race, and I did horrible. I didn't even make the 24 hours before I had to back out, and I DNF'd, and I quit, and went to all these dark places. And eventually, just like Meredith was saying, I didn't know I had so much in common with you, Meredith. I eventually blew those 2 herniated discs in my back and had surgery. And I thought my running career was over. What it really became was the start of my ultra career instead of the end of it. The doctors and people told me that I probably should quit running, or at least stick to 5Ks. And I came back saying, well, not only am I going to do ultra, I'm going to get good at it. And that's it. I signed up for the Leadville 100 and managed to finish that in 28 hours. I did the Leadville 100 a year later as my second 100 and did 23 hours. I had a couple good performances. I won the 12 hours of Boulder and never looked back from there. And it's just been a crazy ride. And sometimes I'm not sure I got here, but here I am at the finish line of Badwater.
And I think that really goes to show in three different perspectives that we just talked about. Overcoming challenges makes us stronger.
I think not only does it make us stronger, it's a necessary part of life. Without that, you die. You actually get weaker.
It's imperative. I agree with David. I mean, like David, I was in a very, very dark place. The reason I chose to do my very, very first Ironman was because my husband had threatened to kick me out of the house. It was, okay, you can get your proverbial you-know-what together and become a functioning member of this family and, become the goal-oriented person I married again, or you're out of here. Mm-hmm. I was doing some really crazy things. I had just had foot surgery and I had broken my foot for the second time within 6 months, and I'm sitting on the couch, feeling sorry for myself, which is not my normal MO, and was very self-destructive at the time. And, he's like, look, if you keep drinking the way you're drinking and doing the kinds of things you're doing, you're out of here. I'm done. And I said, fine, I'm going to do an Ironman. He's like, okay, let's not get crazy. I still got a cast on my foot, But that was the beginning of all of this. So it's very similar to David's story. I just had to start something. What do sober people do? And that's how it started.
And I think in all of our lives, we need somebody that pushes us. In your case, Meredith, was your husband, and then further on in your running career was Charlie getting you to the start of Bad Water.
Oh, yeah, it was. And even more so than right, Charlie?
I have to say I get asked all the time by people, hey, can you help me get into Bad Water, or can you do this or that? And honestly, most of the time I politely say something that's not discouraging, but I leave the ball in their court. And with Meredith, I knew instinctively that she really had everything necessary to not just do this race, but to have a great race, because it takes that, like a combination almost of desire, anger, drive, passion. It's a strange thing, because I think the theme that you're really hearing is the dark places the three of us saw before we really began running are very similar to the dark places you will find along a course like Bad Water at least 2 or 3 times. And if you don't know what that feels like and how to get beyond it, then it's really not going to work out for you. And I think that really is that's the power of addiction and recovery. I mean, I've always said, in fact, that probably all 100 runners out there at Bad Water are addicts. They may be addicted to something different than any of us ever were, but there's a need and a desire and an addiction that is being fueled by that kind of experience. And it does take a certain kind of individual to see the beauty in that kind of difficulty.
It's funny because I kind of have said all along that I think addicts in general, are great at ultra running and other things, if for no other reason than we know that we can't trust ourselves, and that just because our brains are telling us that we should stop and that we're in trouble doesn't mean that they're right. And we're really good at ignoring those voices when they come. So, it can be a big weakness when you're bogged down in the world of substance abuse, but it can become a tremendous strength when you're out there on the course and it's really dark, like Charlie was saying.
And during Bad Water itself, you, David, and Charlie actually interacted on the course a little bit. Meredith and Charlie ran for about, I think it was, 25 to 30 miles together before Charlie started on his way ahead of Meredith there. But you do interact with so many people that you might have heard about in the news or on Facebook or social networking, Twitter, etc. I would be surprised if those individuals that you were running next to for a few minutes or saw at the pre-race or meetings or post-race events, they had similar stories. They had their dark closets.
Yeah, well, I think here's the thing, that it's so intimate out there. I mean, it sounds strange, but when you're out there and you're seeing another runner and you're spending time with that person, it is almost as intimate certainly intimate as running can possibly be, because you're probably seeing that person suffering tremendously. And as I like to say, Bad Water scrapes away all the surface stuff and leaves you with a core of who you are. So normally when you're seeing other runners out there, it's really down to the core of who that person is. And in the case of Meredith, because we've been friends for so long, it was beautiful to watch her just be herself and be free and run and trust the fact that she had done all the hard work to get there, and it would all work out no matter. I tell you something funny. When we parted and I went ahead, the problem with that is I no longer had any way to get any information about Meredith. Like, you don't come into a checkpoint and find out what's going on behind you. There's no way to do that. So I had no way of knowing whether the race was going fantastic or whether, she was laying by the side of the road somewhere trying to figure out what to do. And, so it was scary. My mind went all kinds of places. And when I did finally hear that, she was coming up the Portal Road and just her status in the race, I was so excited about that. And I, and really it was as emotionally rewarding for me to see how well she did as it was for my own race.
like you said, it's so intimate when you're out there. And when we started the race, because Charlie and I trained so much together and we raced so much together this year, we did 4 races before this together. When we started, I wasn't even nervous because I just felt like we were doing another training run or just another one of our races, or, it just felt like off we went. I was telling my husband, it was like, okay, here we go. And then later in the race, when I was about to turn onto the portal road, he sent his crew chief out to see where I was. And that just, at that point, I was struggling. I knew I had to go those last 13 miles up that climb, and here comes Chip. And I just thought, wow, that is so freaking awesome. That's just what Ultra's all about. It's a family. And I had been going back and forth with David Goggins since the middle of the night, which was really cool too. And it's amazing to see someone turn themselves inside out. He was really hurting, going back and forth with this individual over and over and over for hours and miles. I mean, it had been 15 hours we had been going back and forth. So like you said, it's an intimacy, and to see someone just struggle and fight and become this machine, it was really, really cool. And I mean, I'll never forget it. I just feel like I know him to the core, even though there wasn't a lot of talking done, It was incredible.
I think he finished just a couple of spots ahead of you, so the two of you had a chance.
It was only like 10 minutes. Yeah,
exactly, just to interact while you were out there. But I think the two of you have hinted on something that I'd like to explore with the three of you, starting with David. 113 degrees, I think if we ask, and that was probably even conservative on some moments out there with the high temperature. I think last week, if we ask anybody if it was the hottest week of the summer so far, they would agree. We heard about planes in Arizona in the Southwest being forced to be down or not take off because of such the humidity and heat out there. And I think I'd like to transition at this point, because when we think Badwater, or if we've ever seen the Badwater area, we know it's a very tough area. It conditions, the heat. Now we're putting in mental struggle and physical struggle. If you had to say there was that moment out there that you didn't think that you would complete it, among probably a few, what was it?
Well, the heat, actually, as I understand it, got above 120 degrees during the race. In fact, I think I read that Dean Karnassus said on an interview somewhere that the thermometer at Stovepipe Wells actually got up to like 129 or something like that. Wow. For me, I know that the time to commit to finishing a race isn't during a race. So going into the start line, I had made that commitment to myself that it was going to have to be ugly in a way that I couldn't even imagine to get me to stop. But the first gut check moment for me came at an unexpected point. Being a Badwater rookie, I assumed I was going to run into the most trouble, in that first 40 miles or so when the temperature is so intense. But I actually made it through that, ahead of the pace that I'd set for myself and feeling really good. And it wasn't until those 20-plus mile-per-hour headwinds started hitting us up Towns Pass, and I went from feeling great to having severe abdominal cramps, and they never went away. Actually, they stayed with me for the last 80 miles of the entire race. I kept just doing what I could do to run forward slowly, and eventually, when we get to Panamint at 72 miles, is when I finally realized that they weren't going to go away. So this was my race. This is what it's going to be like. I'm going to have these cramps, and I'm going to either figure out a way to move forward or stop, and there was no chance I was going to stop.
I'm very, very similar to David. Those headwinds going up Towns Pass were pretty brutal. I'm not very big, and I was getting picked up like 5 feet at a time and blown across the road towards the center line, and then I'd move back over and I'd get blown across the road again. So it was kind of a put my head down and just slog through it deal. And I was getting a little frustrated, but then I just like, okay, I mean, I can either whine about the wind or shut up and go. So I just went, and I knew it would eventually pass. I've seen Charlie do some crazy things in the wind. So I remembered that, and I called on that and got through it. And then the other time was, I was having a moment right before I went up the Whitney portal. It was one of the only times I did not waste any time at my crew car. And I looked at my pacer that was out there, and I was like, I just really want to go to the car for a minute. And he goes, nope, not going to the car. And I said, why? And he goes, because you're in third And if you go to the car, you might lose it. And I said, all right. I said, how fast do I have to go up this thing? And he goes, actually, you have to run it if you want to keep it. And I said, you've got to be kidding me. And he's like, no, you pretty much have to run it. And so I just put my head down and I went, but it was the hardest thing I've ever done. I'm not going to lie to you. I had to pretty much run up the Whitney portal to keep my position. So that was the hardest thing for me, was the gut check. I mean, there's a picture of me with my head down trying to run up the Whitney portal. And that was really hard.
David, you have a crew. Meredith, you have a crew. Charlie, you all have a crew. And I think Meredith highlighted something there, that one of the rules of Badwater is that if you get off course, you have to be returned to the same spot. So that means that you could sit in the car for a few minutes, get rested, talk to your crew, stop, just making sure that you knew who was behind you. Did that have to happen for you, David? What was some of your stopping points?
At Panamint, that 72-mile mark, when I'd been battling the stomach cramps, I decided to jump in the back of the truck and just give myself 10 or 15 minutes, still kind of hoping that, the stomach thing would work itself out and I'd be able to feel good. And that was a really dark kind of place, because I had never stopped during a race before in the middle of it. And I never, tried to sleep or do anything like that. And I was really afraid of myself more than anything, that I would get comfortable and then that would put me in a place where I really wanted to stop. So I did stop for about 10 minutes, and my crew kind of developed a tagline that kept us going for the rest of the race. They were trying to get me to stop for about a half hour or so, and I made it about 15 minutes, I think, was the total that I lasted. And then when I jumped out of the truck, I said, "This ain't no pillow factory." And everybody started laughing. And then we just kind of repeated that every time that I started feeling bad, or if I would say something that was, perceived as negative, someone would just say, "This ain't no pillow factory." And then we just kind of keep going from there.
Charlie, have you ever said that in your running career?
I don't think I've ever said that exact word, but it's a good one. I'm going to write that one down for future reference. But I tell my crew before a race like this, do not under any circumstance allow me to sit down. I mean, seriously, unless I am nearly comatose. The only time I want to stop is if I'm changing shoes and socks. And I would rather slow down and keep moving than to stop and be, you don't make any progress. I'm stating the obvious when you're sitting still. I had a great T-shirt for years. It just said simply, "The chair is the enemy." I always remind myself and my crew of that. And I will say, I had a totally rookie crew. It was the first time I'd ever gone to Badwater, except for my first one, where I didn't have any veterans on the crew, and it was refreshing. And Meredith was a rookie, and her crew, of course, was all rookies. And it was actually that's not true. She had Mossy on her team, had done Badwater last year. But generally speaking, between our two crews, there was almost no Badwater experience. And I have to say that enthusiasm and the wide-eyed curiosity that they had about this event was wonderful to see. And I know for absolute certain that every one of them came away from that event with not only an appreciation for the event itself, but with the fire and desire to go out and do something big themselves. And I think that's a great gift of being able to see a race like Badwater firsthand.
To be able to inspire them as your crew members, and maybe they're there next year, or they're doing their first ultra, or their next race. Charlie, that brings up a good question, though. Is it tough on that crew? Obviously, it's very tough for the runners, but do you see your crew struggle out there as well? Well,
not only do they struggle themselves sometimes physically, and I basically assign someone to be in charge of monitoring the crew, because most of the medical emergencies that happen out there, a whole lot of them are actually crew related, not runner related. And they forget to take care of themselves because they're so hyper focused on their runner, and that can be dangerous. And I remind them that that's great that they're so focused on the runner, but if something happens to them, then my race is over too. So it's important that they take care of each other. But I think that watching them watch this race, and again, I take people that I trust, because they're going to see me in an intimate way, vomiting my way across Death Valley, sometimes being unhappy, sometimes not always, hopefully I was polite for the most part, but I always explain before the race that I need some blanket forgiveness during the race. And, hopefully I don't say or do anything that hurts anyone's feelings. But if I do, please cut me a little bit of slack, and I'll we'll work it out after the race. And what's really funny in my case is I know of many things that happened out there during the race to the crew, with vehicles, with food, with you name it. And their job was to keep me completely insulated from that and isolated out there so that I didn't know the chaos that was going on, because some crazy stuff happened out there. And, as a runner, you can't micromanage that stuff. You just have to keep moving forward.
My son was on the crew. He's 15. And Charlie was gracious enough to meet with my crew beforehand and help them out and give them some tips. And that was awesome. And so he also told them, do not let me in the car. And he's taught me very well, don't sit down, the chair is the enemy. But having my 15-year-old out in Death Valley and temperatures nearing 130 degrees, there were times when I was like, Watson, have you had any water? Watson, have you had your medicine? I'm running the race and I'm worried about him. And then on the flip side, I could tell he was worried about me at certain points, and I would go, are you okay? And he's like, yeah, I'm just worried about you. So there, like Charlie said, we're supposed to be insulated from some of the things going on, but there was a time too, I was pouring so much water over my head that I was worried we were running out of water, and it turns out I was right. So we were getting really low that on the water, and I kept going, do we have enough water? I'm using a lot on my head. Oh yeah, we're fine. No, we were not fine at all. So it was, like Charlie said, it was total chaos at times, and we're not supposed to really know, but we do. It's funny.
And for David and Meredith, we get that burst of adrenaline as soon as we see that finish line. Can you paint that picture for the audience when you finally made it to that 134th or 133rd mile before finishing the 135 miles of Badwater? David?
Yeah, I can. Well, my first burst of adrenaline actually came right after I got out of the car in Penniman, and we were actually able to, after the Pillow Factory comment, run up Father Crowley, which had actually been the best running I'd done all day. Kind of the same way when we first made the turn on the Portal Road in Lone Pine, and I knew we had this big climb looming, but I'm fortunate enough to live in Colorado and, kind of butter my toast with hills. Then again, I've never started a 5,000-foot climb before with, 120 plus miles on my legs, but I knew I didn't want to get carried away and go at it too hard and hurt myself, but I just put my head down, and I was simultaneously trying to walk this tightrope of experiencing that I was going to make it no matter what, and trying to put that in the back of my head too, because I knew I was going to have 3.5 or 4 hours to get to the top of the hill. So it's the longest finish line I've ever experienced in my entire life, because it lasted 13 miles. And by the time we got to the top of the switchbacks, I was looking for the finish line around every one of those corners, and I was confused as to why they hit it so well. But when we saw it, it was the greatest moment of my life, other than my kids being born, honestly. It was the culmination of so many things. I'm coming up on 8 years of sobriety in just a couple days, and the fact that this thing seemed so unobtainable and so impossible, and the fact that the course is point to point, and we literally started, on the other side of Death Valley, all that just kind of came crashing down on me at once. And when Chris Kosman handed me my buckle, I actually told him that I was afraid it wasn't real, and he laughed at that, but it was actually very came from a very real place in my heart, that I was having this kind of panic attack, that I was afraid I was going to wake up in the hotel room and it was still race morning and I hadn't started the race yet, and it was just so good and so great that I was afraid that somehow it wasn't real and it was going to be taken from me.
Meredith, what about you? First, Badwater. The heat, the mental, the frustration, the cramping, but then the finish line.
It was surreal. The climb is just such a thing of beauty at the end too. It was just so vast and gorgeous, and the switchbacks, and it was unlike anything really that I've ever seen. Not to mention just the the difficulty. I loved it. I thought the end was a perfect Badwater ending for me. And the funny thing was I had Mossy going up the entire climb with me, and then my son and my other two guys that always crew for me, Jeff and Justin, in the car. And they were it was so cool having all of them along with me for the climb at the end. And then Mossy kept telling me I had a mile left, but really the finish was right there. It was like 2 minutes away. And he's like, no, you have a mile left. So he was lying to me to keep me going really, really fast, because they knew I wanted a 32 handle and I was really close to going over. So they told me I had a mile left. So I was sprinting at the end. I mean, I was running as fast as I could when I turned the corner and could see the line. And I looked at him, and you could see me going, oh, you lied. And so I just kept running as fast as I could. And so it was a really cool ending for me, because I actually was running as fast as I probably was not even running fast, but it felt really fast. Because, you're on legs that just ran 135 miles, but it felt like 6-minute pace to me, and it was probably like 15-minute pace. And it was my son was crying, and that was really special to me. And he said, Mom, you come home from races and you tell us stories, and I'm always like, yeah, whatever. And he said, I would not have believed this if I hadn't seen it from my own eyes. And that to me just summed up the entire, 32 hours and 52 minutes, because it was very special for me to have him, of all people, there to share it with me, because he just said, I wouldn't have believed it. I just honestly wouldn't have believed this experience. And it's something I can take with me forever.
And I bet in the future he will be running it and having you crew for him. Charlie, you are the veteran of this conversation, have run 7 of these Bad Water Ultramarathon, and there has to be, and not necessarily just this year, but over the last 7 years, there has to be that moment that the finish line was in sight and those same emotions came to you. Can you take us back?
It was an interesting year to go up the Portal Road, because here's my experience. In the 6 times I finished this race, not one time have I ever passed anyone going up the Portal Road, nor have I ever been passed. So my experience is that where you are at the bottom of that mountain is where you will finish. Mm-hmm. So this year, as I turned onto the Portal Road, about a quarter mile ahead of me was the 4th place guy, Harvey Lewis. And my crew pointed it out, and literally I put my head down and just said, oh, shit, because I knew what that meant. Because I could see him, I really had no choice but to go after him. And that meant that there was going to be some pain. And I basically ran the first 7 or 8 miles of the Portal Road. And I said, to myself and out loud to my crew, I said, he may beat me, but he's not going to enjoy it. As it turned out after the race, it was quite funny. He came up and, laughingly was cursing me, he and his crew, because I basically forced him to run up that mountain to hold me off. But it ended up being just a great experience. Now, I will say I got about 4 miles from the finish, and I was completely spent. I was about 7 or 8 minutes behind Harvey, and ultimately finished like 20 or 25 minutes behind, because I struggled just incredibly for those last few miles. But, for me, it was a bookend experience is what I like to call it. I've had a difficult last few years, haven't been back to Badwater since 2009. And this was a way for me to kind of finish the story, if you will. And literally and figuratively, I am writing a book, and before this race, I decided that this Badwater would be the final chapter in that book. And that meant anything from a DNF to winning the race. That was how this story was going to end. And I would get on with sort of the next chapter of my life. And I feel very fortunate that I had such a great experience.
And it sounds like the 3 of you did experience something that you always wanted to do, or for the longest time have wanted to start and finish. And congratulations to the 3 of you. I think as we wrap up over the last few minutes here of the interview, and thanks to the 3 of you for spending such time with us today, We don't necessarily run Bad Water Ultramarathon in our lives. Obviously, a select few do. But we do run a lot of marathons and half marathons, 5Ks, 10Ks, and we covered a lot of that physical and mental challenge that we experience. But I'd like to kind of go around the table as we wrap up, just for our listeners. And if there was one thing of advice that you could give them when it comes to summer racing, or that longer distance that we haven't done before, or that race that is on our bucket list that we know we have to go in, hopefully at 100%, what kind of advice would that be? And I'll start with you, David, if you can, and tell us a little bit about what you would say to them, kind of any distance, or that 5K to that marathon or that ultra marathoner.
Actually, I say all the time that every race is its own race, and that no one is necessarily more difficult mentally than another. One time a couple years ago, I did a fundraiser and I ran 24 hours on a treadmill. And certainly not the first person to do that. Many, many people have done that. But the reason I decided to do it was precisely because it was the most horrible thing that I could think of. It was the absolute most terrifying thing I could think of. But the reason I chose it is because I knew that the only way I was going to get through that was the same way I got sober or managed to lose the weight, and that was doing it, 1 minute at a time, minute to minute, hour to hour. So I tell people, the race is the race, the distance is the distance. You've got to really just give in to the process, and you can't try to own the weight of it. Whether you're standing at your first half marathon or the start line of the Badwater 135, if you start breaking it down into pieces and thinking about how long you're going to be out there and how much it might hurt and how much you're going to want to quit, it'll fold you up faster than anything. The only thing you can do is commit before the gun goes off and then put it all away and just move forward. So trust the process, trust the work that you did getting there, and let everything else just kind of sort its way out.
David, some great advice there. Meredith, can you add to that?
Yes, definitely. I think it's really important that if you have a goal, whether it's a 5K, whether it's a mile, just get out there and do it. The only thing that's holding you back is registering for that race. There's so many times I hear people say, well, I really want to do a half marathon. I really want to do a marathon. Just register and do it. I registered for an Ironman before I ever did a half Ironman. Before I ever even had done a sprint triathlon, I had registered for my Ironman. And then I started whittling away at different distances to get ready for that. And, people are going to tell you you're silly or stupid or whatever, but they're sitting on the couch. If you have a goal and you want to do something, I say just get out there and do it. Charlie has a saying, do something now. I love that. Mm-hmm. And I remember here, when I first met him, and I think he even has it trademarked, do something now. Take that first step, register for it, do something now. I love that. And I think it's really important that if someone has a desire, that they don't listen to all the chatter from everybody else telling you can't run or you're going to get hurt or your knees are going to be messed up, because there's a lot of people who are living proof that that's not the case.
You're right, Meredith. And Charlie, I'm sure you would reiterate that message. Plus, with Badwater that we talked about today, not everybody gets in. It's an invite-only race. You do fill out a registration for the race, but you're picked. And again, some people might not race this year, but they might race in the future. And Charlie, what about your thoughts on racing and what David and Meredith have talked about in the last few minutes?
Yeah, I think both of their pieces of advice are fantastic, and I think that it's one thing I like to say also is that you if you're going to run a 50-mile trail race, don't do your training on a treadmill, for example. And so for Badwater, I can't simulate 120 degrees here in North Carolina, but I made a pact with myself over the last 3 months that basically I would make myself as uncomfortable as possible every single time I ran. And to do that, I put on, 3 winter shirts or, hats and gloves and long tights. And I look like a crazy person, of course, out running in June in the park here with all of that on. People usually call the Park Service on me. at some point to say that there's some idiot out there running. And when the Park Service comes up to me, I basically just admit to that. I'm like, yes,
it's the first step.
Right. I am an idiot,
Yeah,
but
right.
I do have a.
It's the first step.
So, right, exactly. So I admit that I have a problem, and I'm going to continue running. And so, I think the point is, if you're, for anybody out there thinking of doing any race, whatever it is, a half marathon, or working your way up to an ultra, it's important to simulate the circumstances that you're going to be racing in as much as possible, and make yourself uncomfortable. At Badwater, to go into that race like, hoping for a cold front is just foolish. So,
Yeah.
it's necessary to just simply train in the heat and be ready mentally. I think David said it very well. You can't have any weakness going into Badwater. There can't be that grain of doubt in your mind. You have to find a way to push that aside and just simply say, this is going to suck sometimes. And when that happens, I just have to keep moving. And mental preparation, there's no better mental preparation than being an addict. So, we know how to push through the tough times. And I think that the three of us stand for, for that premise that it will always get better if you just keep moving forward.
If I can just add one thing to that, a guy that was on my crew who's also a sober athlete, the night before the race, we were at the Furnace Creek Resort having dinner, and he looked at me and he went, "You know what, man?" He goes, "This isn't going to be the hardest thing you've ever done." And at first, I didn't really understand what he meant, and then it hit me what he said and how powerful that was. And to Charlie's point about, as addicts, we know how hard it is to push through, and he was right. I mean, no matter how bad it sucked out there and how horrible it was going to be 2 days. And in the face of doing something like battling substance abuse, it really is nothing.
It's sort of the same point. I went straight from Badwater to my son's with Watson to his camp for Parents Weekend, and one of the parents yesterday said, "Wow, that's really stupid what you did. What a great role model." Real sarcastic. And Watson, my son, stuck up for me, and he goes, "There's worse things she could be doing." And I thought, wow, out of the mouths of babes, because he knows, he knows my history, and he's right. The other parent has no idea, and this is a parent that was sitting in a chair with a shirt on that said, "Life is crap." I just thought, wow, that's just really funny. And my husband even says that I enjoy the process of getting ready to experience that pain, because there's nothing worse than, it couldn't be worse than my worst day drinking and using. It just, there's no way. Because I there, but for the grace of God, I should be dead.
Very true. And I think we could fill a show with those individuals that we meet in life that just don't get it. They just don't get it. So now we have talked about what has been a finish at Badwater. Charlie, what's on the schedule next? You're wrapping up your book, races, places. Where are you going to be?
Yeah, I'm just planning on gaining about 50 pounds and hanging out, sitting around for a while. And
Nice.
No, I'm kidding, of course. But the Furnace Creek 508 is next for me, and that's about 2.5 months from now. Another painful, nonstop cycling event this time. I'm actually really looking forward to it. I've done it a couple of times. Last time I did it, in fact, Meredith was on my crew for that. This year, she's taking that one on herself. And so we'll be out there once again racing side by side. Beyond that, I do have a big project, and it's actually called 2 Run 7. And it's going to take a couple of years to complete. And so I'll come back on the show at some future time, if you'll have me, and tell you all about that one. But for now, I'm going to give my running legs a little break for a couple of months and get on a bike and see if I can't find some good suffering that way.
We'd love to have you back on, talking about the suffering and also all the other races and events that you do over the years. You're an inspiration, Charlie, as Meredith and David. Charlie, website as well for our listeners to go to as we're wrapping up today so that they can read more about you and connect with you.
Yeah, just charlieengle.com, and I am very accessible on Facebook and Twitter, and There's both a fan page on Facebook and a personal page, and there's plenty of room for lots of people on both of those.
Excellent. Meredith, what about you? Badwater, Ironmans, all of these races, there's got to be something on your schedule still.
Yes, like Charlie, I will be at the Furnace Creek 508, which is 508-mile bicycle race in Death Valley as well. It's also an adventure core race. So it's 508 miles all at once, 10 mountain passes, 35,000 feet of climbing. It will be my first one. So I'm also a rookie at that race. Should be very interesting. And then I'm sure I'll do another Ultraman next year at some point, because now I can swim again. After my spine surgery, I wasn't able to swim for a while. I was able to bike and run, but not swim. So I'm looking forward to that.
Excellent. Meredith, what about a way for our listeners to connect with you?
I have a website. It's meredithdolhare.com, and they can email me off of the website. There's a link there, and I'm also on Twitter at Meredith and Instagram. Same address.
Great. And David, you're inspiring as well. You do a lot on Facebook. You're inspiring through your training. What's on your schedule, and what's next for you?
Next on my schedule is a little trail run in 3 weeks for the Leadville 100. I kind of always had that in the back of my mind with Badwater, is that, Leadville has an event where if you do the 100-mile bike race and then the 100-mile run a week later, they call it the Lead Man. Mm-hmm. Well, I told them that if I can do Badwater and the Leadville run 3 weeks apart, that we should call it the Death Man.
The Bad Man.
But I got that, and then there's a race I'm putting on. I'm kind of a part-time fledgling race director too, and we're putting on a race in Longmont, Colorado called the Heart of Steel Ultra. And it's really an ultra, or kind of an introduction to ultra. It's a 1.5 hour, 3 hour, 6 hour, 12 hour, or 24-hour event. And we've welcomed everybody from any walk of life who's experienced hardship and that they've overcome that, or they're looking to start a journey to overcoming hardship. And everyone completes their assigned time, and we all finish together. And what we do is we have everyone write down their thoughts on their bib numbers during the race, and then we cast them into a fire at the finish line, kind of signifying a new life. So I'll be putting that on October 5th in Longmont, and that's it.
And what about a website?
I'm all over Facebook and stuff like that, and it's been amazing the amount of support that I've received from so many people. And like meeting Charlie out on the Badwater course and having him know about my story from Facebook is just an amazing blessing, that's just beyond belief. And when I was using so much, I had really, like most addicts, built a wall around myself, and I didn't let anybody, not even my ex-wife, know who I was and know anything personal about me. And when I found sobriety, a big part of that was tearing down those walls and just hanging it out there for everyone to see. And that was so uncomfortable for me. And I've continued that in my journey, that, I wear my shortcomings, or whatever you want to call them, kind of as a badge of honor. And if anyone who's ever followed me on Facebook knows, there's nothing that's going on in my head that I'm not willing to share. And I get strength from that. And it started out as kind of a selfish thing in a way, but it's really come full circle. And I've had so many people reach out to me and say that they were able to derive strength from that. So I just want to thank, you for having me on, and Charlie for, taking a couple seconds as he whizzed by during the race, and so many people who have taken the time out to do that and extend a hand to me. And it's overwhelming, and I don't know what to say other than thank you.
You're welcome. And from our viewpoint, we are honored to have you and Meredith and Charlie on the show, and we'll put links up to your websites and your Facebook page on the Pace Per Mile site. And as well, the door is open, and I would love to have the three of you back on the show in the future, either near or when something major happens in your life that we'd love to inspire our listeners with. An incredible show today, I will tell you. Out of the years that we have been putting on Pace Per Mile, this is one of the more inspiring and thoughtful shows going into Badwater, and I think there's more to come with the three of you on Pace Per Mile. So we would love to have you back on.
Well, thanks so much for having us.
Thanks, Chris.
Charlie Engle, Meredith Dolhare, David Clark, thanks for joining us on Pace Per Mile.
At Pace Per Mile, we want to share your story. Do you know someone that has a compelling topic to share with the listeners? Help us tell your story or their story by emailing us today. info@pacepermile.com. That's info@pacepermile.com.